Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your otherworldly host, Tabitha, and today we are covering episode 13, Journey from San Juan. This one was shot in mid-March of 1971, and it aired on April 8th, 1971. We are rapidly coming to the end of season 1, my guys. We're familiar once again with all of our creatives this week. The story was by Roy Huggins, and the teleplay was by Dick Nelson, who previously wrote Stagecoach 7, and it was directed by Jeffrey Hayden, who has already directed 3 episodes, Wrong Train to Brimstone, A Fistful of Diamonds, and The Man Who Murdered Himself. Now, have I got a story for you about our main guest star this week. Her name is Claudine Longette as Michelle Monet. Alright, let's just start with her career. First off, she doesn't have a ton of IMDb credits to her name, and I swear in at least a third of them her character's name is Michelle. I guess because she's French and American writers couldn't think of any other French-sounding names. She did a TV movie with Pete Duell the same year called How to Steal an Airplane, directed by Leslie H. Martinson, who also directed the ASJ episode The Girl in Boxcar No. 3. Longette was a singer, too. Not a very good one, in my opinion. I think her voice is pretty thin. But she did get decent amount of success out of it. She had a lot of covers, but she also had a lot of hits. Well, maybe not a lot. But she did okay. Unfortunately, it's not really her career that she's remembered for these days, assuming anyone remembers her at all. Okay, first off, she was married to singer Andy Williams, and I didn't know him aside from some of his Christmas songs that I have on my iPod, but apparently he sang other non-seasonal songs too. Good for him. Together they had 3 children, and eventually they divorced. Then she started dating an Olympic skier by the name of Vladimir Spider Sabic. Supposedly, he was kicking her out of his apartment and ending the relationship when she fatally shot him on March 21st, 1976. Yes, she killed a man. Her story was that the gun accidentally went off while he was showing her how to use it. Andy Williams, her ex, publicly supported her, paid for her defense team, and escorted her to and from the courthouse. He said that she was still the mother of his children and that they were still good friends. Now, the cops mishandled this case by taking a blood sample from her and her diary, both without warrants. The blood sample showed cocaine in her blood, and her diary told a story of her relationship with Sabic going south. This is according to the prosecution, anyway. These were not allowed into trial. Naturally, this kind of helped her defense. She ended up getting convicted of negligent homicide, had to pay a small fine, and spend 30 days in jail. 30 days that she got to choose. She spent it mostly on weekends. What? What? Now, I wasn't there. Maybe her story is totally true. But this is the lightest slap on the wrist for killing someone I've ever seen. And the kicker? She married her defense attorney. They are still married and living a quiet life in Aspen. The Rolling Stones even recorded a song about it, simply called Claudine. Claudine's back in jail again. Yeah. The point is, I used to find her part in this episode sweet, and now it's a little difficult for me to separate the art from the artist. Moving on, if you can, we have Susan Oliver as Blanche Graham. Now, she worked steadily in TV her whole career. She was in the original Star Trek pilot, The Cage with Captain Pike. She is the iconic image of the Orion slave girl. The green chick. Other than that, she worked on Peyton Place, The Andy Griffith Show, The Love Boat, The Invaders, Days of Our Lives, and her last credited appearance is in an episode of Freddy's Nightmares. Aside from acting, she was also a pilot. She survived a crash in her personal plane in 1966. She wrote a memoir called Odyssey, all about her aviation career. She even got the chance to co-star in the TV movie Amelia Earhart, for which she was nominated for an Emmy in 1976. She also directed an episode of MASH and an episode of Trapper John. She passed away in 1990 at the age of 58. Next up is Nico Minardos as El Clavo. He was a contract player for 20th Century Fox in the 50s. As a TV actor, he worked on Maverick, Riverboat, The Twilight Zone, The Flying Nun, and It Takes a Thief. He will go on to guest star in another ASJ episode. His career ended in 1986 when he was indicted on conspiracy charges to illegally ship arms to Iran. What is with the guest stars this week? Now, in his defense, the indictment was completely thrown out, but he ended up bankrupt paying his legal fees. Then we have Dub Taylor as Johnson. He was in movies like The Getaway, The Wild Bunch, and You Can't Take It With You. He also had small parts in Back to the Future Part 3 and Maverick the Movie. He guest starred in a short-lived series that I have watched called Chopper 1. It's not very good. He will be in another ASJ episode in Season 2. And he was in an episode of The Monkees! Hey, hey! He seemed to jump between film and television with great ease. In 2007, he had a feature documentary made about him called That Guy, The Legacy of Dub Taylor. Next is Joaquin Martinez as Carlos. Martinez was a medical student and a teacher had him join the drama club to help him get over his shyness. He did the usual westerns, Bonanza, Death Valley Days, and Gunsmoke. He worked on other shows like Quincy, Northern Exposure, and LA Law. One of his last roles was a small part in the James Bond movie Die Another Day. You know, the best James Bond movie. And finally, we have Gregory Sierra as Juan. You probably know him as Chano from the first couple of seasons of Barney Miller, or as the first lieutenant on Miami Vice before he was killed off 4 episodes in and replaced with Edward James Olmos. He also worked on Lou Grant, Soap, The Greatest American Hero, and The X-Files. On the film side, he was in The Towering Inferno, Deep Cover, and John Carpenter's Vampires. The episode itself was a reworking of the Maverick episode Escape to Tampico, but there are enough differences to me that it doesn't feel like a complete rehash. Let's dive in. We start with another sneak peek. Boo. An old man is telling a very gorgeous woman that the men she's been spending time with, Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, are not who they say they are. Absolutely riveting. After the opening credits, we catch up with the boys rounding up cattle in the town of San Juan, Mexico. They're being watched, but not interfered with. Not yet, anyway. Hayes tries to be the cow whisperer to this bull that only has one horn, and it actually works. It joins the rest of their meager herd. The men who were watching them, Juan and Pedro, approach. They let them know that those cattle are spoken for by El Clavo. The boys say that they asked around, and the cattle don't belong to anyone except for whoever rounds them up. They claim their plan is to round up a few hundred heads, drive them to Arizona, and then sell them. Juan makes a not-so-subtle threat that it would be bad for their health that they go down this path. That evening, they've rounded up a decent amount of them. But, there's only 2 of them. I don't know much about cattle drives, just what I've seen on TV. But I feel like you need more than 2 people to make it work. They complain that this job really sucks, but Hayes reminds them that they're only doing it as a cover for why they're really there, which they won't tell us yet. When Hayes climbs into their wagon, he's shocked to find a woman named Michelle inside. I love how she gets mad at them when she definitely broke into their wagon. She says she's an American in the Frenchest accent I've ever heard. She says she's from New Orleans, so I guess that's good enough. She doesn't have any money. She was stranded when she met a sea captain named Captain McTavish who offered her free passage home. But once they were on board, she found out that he expected payment in other ways, if you know what I mean. Fucking creep. So at the first port, she bailed. The boys offer to take her to the hotel and put her up there. Not to be shallow, but Michelle, girl, run a brush through your hair. It looks awful. They get to the hotel, and luckily McTavish isn't around. In an earlier version of the script, he was there, and Hayes and the kid got rid of him. I'm glad that was cut. I don't think it would have added anything. Kid invites Michelle to have dinner with them, and she agrees. When they're alone, Hayes is like, don't even think about it, because he knows him too well. Kid argues his case that he's just helping out someone in need, and Hayes argues back that they're here for a reason, and Michelle, as a distraction, is maybe not great. Like anything would stop the kid from wooing a woman who's needy and smiles at him. They meet the owner of the hotel and casino, Blanche Graham, and Hayes starts flirting hard with her immediately. He invites her to also join them for dinner, since it's a little lopsided with just one woman and 2 men. Well, I disagree. That sounds like it could be a great arrangement, but whatever. Blanche agrees. At dinner, Michelle mentions that she's a dancer and a singer. She says her mother thinks she has a great voice. Oh, well, if her mom thinks so, then it must be true. You know whose mother thought they had a great singing voice? Everyone who's ever made an ass of themselves on American Idol, that's who. Michelle all but begs Blanche to let her sing for tips in the casino. She agrees, but clearly doesn't think she's going to do very well. After dinner, Hayes and Blanche have a romantic walk out by the little fountain, and she questions what his plans are for the cattle. She asks what he thinks he's going to do about El Clavo. Honestly, spoiler alert, Blanche is a bad person, but Hayes does need someone who's very business-minded like her. He needs someone who can keep up with him in that way. Meanwhile, Kid and Michelle are walking up to her room. She kisses him and says that he has restored her faith in men. Thank Christ. What a power he has. She kisses him again, and he, gentleman that he is, bids her good night, and she goes to her room alone. The next day, the guys are getting shot at by El Clavo and his men. They turn tail and run, and Kid is grazed in the arm. When they get back to the hotel, the women tell them what idiots they think the boys are. Blanche says that she told them so, but even so, she admires their nerve, if nothing else. Michelle just doesn't want to see them get killed. The boys reveal to us a little more about exactly what they're doing this all for. Someone hired them to get Blanche across the border without using force. And they both look very, very beautiful in this scene. You should all check it out just to lust after them for a minute. They go back and meet El Clavo and try and negotiate with him. El Clavo is like, you want to make a deal for my own cattle? Which is, a fair question. Hayes says that the cattle prices are super high in the US. They're $30 a head. And if he lets them drive them up north to sell them, they will split the profit with him 50-50. They estimate that would bring about $7,500 each. El Clavo agrees. Also, El Clavo tells the kid that when he grazed him, he was aiming for his head. That's just rude. Back with Blanche, she can't believe that they actually managed to make a deal with him. Hayes tells her that he's lying to him and that cattle are actually going for $20 a head, but since El Clavo's cattle aren't exactly the pick of the litter, they'll only bring about $8 a head. And Blanche is so ready to take him to bed right now. She is completely turned on by his deception. But they're interrupted by her major domo, Carlos. Carlos wouldn't have stopped me from climbing Hayes like a tree, but that's just me. Kid joined Hayes at the bar, and we find out that Blanche killed a man sometime in the past. Michelle starts singing a French love song, and I guess she sounds fine here because it's such a very soft song. It sounds almost like a lullaby. But I don't speak French, so for all I know, she's singing the most X-rated stuff imaginable. In Blanche's office, we're back at the sneak peek. The man, Johnson, says that when he met Hayes and the kid last year, they were traveling salesmen. No one knew what they were selling, they were going by the names Barton and Slattery, and then they just up and disappeared. So, they didn't only rob trains and banks, they also ran cons. I wonder if this is something that Soapy taught them. At the casino, no one except our boys are paying any attention to Michelle. It's kind of sad. It's like when you go to one of those farm places for kids, that have the hay rides and everything, and there's an outdoor stage and a local band is playing and absolutely nobody's paying attention to them and it's just awkward for everyone. It's kind of like that. Anyway, she decides to switch things up and starts singing an upbeat song in English. She doesn't sound nearly as good with this one. Again, her voice is so thin and quiet. She lacks any energy in this very energetic song. The boys, in a show of support, sing along to the chorus. Michelle does her best to get the attention of the other patrons, but it doesn't really work. I know this word gets thrown around a lot these days, but seeing the boys sing this stupid song, it really does make me cringe. In Michelle's room, she despairs over her meager earnings. Blanche enters and offers her passage money home if she finds out who Hayes and the kid really are. Confused, she talks with the kid and tells them what Blanche offered her. She asks if he really is lying about who he is. Kid doesn't want to flat out lie to her when asked point blank, so he simply says he can't tell her a lot of things about himself. And sweet Michelle says that she'll just tell Blanche she couldn't get anything out of him. She trusts him, and I think that's very cute. Not as cute as I did before I knew what I know now about Claudine Langette, but still cute. In the boys' room, Kid starts packing, but Hayes isn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. Bringing Blanche across the border of her own free will is going to get them paid $5,000, and they so rarely get paid. He comes up with a new plan that Michelle will tell Blanche the truth that they're Hayes and Curry, and Blanche will be so tempted by the $20,000 reward that she'll cross back into the States with them. So, Kid relays all this to Michelle, but Michelle doesn't believe that's who they really are, but she's going to do her best to make Blanche believe it. Kid reveals the rest of the plot to her. The man Blanche killed was her husband, and the man who paid them to bring her back to the US was his father. I have to say, Michelle does a pretty good job selling the story to Blanche. She tells her that she didn't believe the story because Mr. Jones was drunk, but when he sobered up, he went back to her and told her not to pay attention to anything he said last night. Blanche is getting convinced. She says if it's true, she'll give Michelle her money. The guys come back to the hotel after a few nights spent out with their cattle. Blanche is even flirtier than usual with Hayes. She offers him some men to finish the roundup and help them on the drive. You see, I told you that you can't run a cattle drive with only 2 people. She'll pay the men, she wants a third of their profits, and she gets to come along on the drive. Hayes goes over to, quote, talk it over with Mr. Jones, but really he's just telling them that Blanche is playing right into their hands. They tell Blanche that she's in. The next day, the 2 guys, along with Blanche and Michelle, start the drive to the U.S. Blanche looks so happy it's almost comical. Kid notices that El Clavo and his gang are not far behind them. The guy wants to be sure that our boys aren't double-crossing him, but there's nothing they can do about that right now, so they simply press on. That night, the kid and Michelle are sucking face. She asks him if this is goodbye. In so many words, yes, it is. When they get across the border, Michelle gets on the train to New Orleans. She says she doesn't want that anymore. Kid's like, you'll find someone better, and he's no good, and, all that Pee Wee Herman stuff. I love that she tells him that Thaddeus is a silly name, because it is. No offense to any Thaddeus's out there, but since I don't hear that name outside of stuff set over 100 years ago, I'm gonna assume everybody else realized it was a silly name too. She says that now she does believe he's Kid Curry. He says she'll forget him, and she says no. She'll maybe get over him, but she won't forget him. I thought that was a really sweet line. Then they start playing Michelle's French love song from earlier, and let's not, okay? I've had enough singing this episode. The drive continues on, but bad news, El Clavo is about to find out that the cattle prices are nowhere near $30 a head. Furious, he and his men start charging towards them. Hayes takes control of the wagon. All they can do is run the herd off so the gang will leave them alone. Which, fine, what are they going to do with them anyway? They're worth $8 a head and were never the point of this trip. With the herd and El Clavo gone, the boys tell Blanche and Michelle that they're cutting their losses, but since they're so close to the border, they might as well just go home. When they get to the border station, Blanche immediately tells the marshal waiting for them that the boys are Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry. Luckily, he's working with the man paying Hayes and Kid and doesn't believe her. The father of Blanche's husband is there, identifies her as his son's killer, and she gets arrested instead. And the look on her face when she sees her ex-father-in-law is pretty priceless. The father is very grateful to the boys, and he pays them $5,000. That might be the most that they ever actually get to keep. No, I take that back. There's one more time. Kid says goodbye to Michelle before she gets on the stage. Michelle says she knows for sure he must be Kid Curry because Thaddeus Jones would have asked her to stay with him, but Kid Curry can't. They kiss and she leaves. Kid watches the stage, and Hayes watches the whole thing. He goes up to the kid and asks if he's alright. The kid kind of brushes it off, but Hayes kindly says that maybe they'll get to New Orleans someday. It's a somber note to go out on, but I like that. I love this episode. I like how the reason why Hayes and the kid are in San Juan in the first place is slowly doled out over the course of the episode and not just told to us up front. It makes it more of a mystery, kind of like Exit to Wickenburg. I like both Michelle and Blanche's characters. Blanche, awful as she may be, had chemistry with Hayes, and Michelle had very sweet chemistry with the kid. What I like about their little romance is how innocent it is. Kid is more the ladies' man of the two, but typically when he has a romance, it's all kind of chaste and just sweet. In fact, from what we've seen so far, Hayes is more likely to just get right to the sex. Aside from the 5th victim, anyway. In the Maverick episode, we know why Maverick is in Mexico from the jump. It's a man he's supposed to bring in, and he ends up really liking the guy and believing he's innocent. Spoiler alert, he is not innocent. They're both good episodes, but different enough not to bother me. The line in the episode goes to Hayes. When the guys first get Michelle to the hotel, he asks if Captain McRavish is there. Instead of McTavish. And this was decades before McDreamy and McSteamy would grace our screens. And the episode goes to Hayes. I thought it was both smart and ballsy of him to reveal their identity to Blanche, banking on her being greedy enough to play into their hands. Next time on Alias Smith & Jones, the guys accidentally switch bags at a train station and wind up with $5 million in jewels. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith & Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men by Sandra K. Sagala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Thanks for listening.